What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Tennessee Volunteers are up next. Before we go game by game and preview their schedule for 2025, let's take a look back at what Tennessee did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Tennessee. My projection for this team was 9-3, and then my prediction for them was 10-2. So I was right on the money with Tennessee's regular season prediction at 10-2. This team did go 10-2 in the regular season, but their overall record was 10-3. This team did go to the college football playoff, but they were eliminated in that first round game against Ohio State. I feel like that was a big disadvantage there for Tennessee, having to play the defending national champions in the first round, but it was a good season for Tennessee. It was a little bit up and down, but I think this was a pretty good year for Tennessee. Again, another 10-win season under Josh Heupel ever since he's gotten here since 2021. This was the schedule from last year for Tennessee. Again, their record was 10-2 in the regular season. That's what we're basing it off of here in this video. But you look at who they played in the non-conference. First off, they played Chattanooga, NC State, Kent State, and UTEP. So their non-conference schedule wasn't too bad. You know, NC State, you feel like that was going to be a tough game in Charlotte, but if you look at the score in that game, it was not even close at all. Tennessee dominated that game, like 51-7, I believe, was the final score in that one. So, yeah, Tennessee's non-conference schedule was not so tough from last year. Looking at who they played at home in the SEC last season, they played Florida, Alabama, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. So they had all four of those teams at home last year. Florida and Alabama obviously were two big games that came down really to the wire. Florida went into overtime. Alabama, of course, came down to the wire. It came down to one really big-time defensive play, but those were two really good wins last year for Tennessee. And then Kentucky and Mississippi State were pretty easy wins. I think if Tennessee probably would have lost to Florida or Alabama, they probably would have been out of the playoff last year, but they were pretty lucky to get those two wins. And then Arkansas and Georgia, those were the two losses on the road last year. They played Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia, and Vanderbilt all on the road. Arkansas, again, that was kind of an embarrassing loss for Tennessee. But Georgia, no surprise there. They lost that game by double digits. Playing in Athens, always a very tough place to play. Let's now look ahead to 2025. This is that schedule for Tennessee. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who they will play in the non-conference for this season. So this is Tennessee's non-conference schedule. They will play Syracuse, East Tennessee State, UAB, and New Mexico State. So 3 cupcake games here, and then you got the big one against Syracuse out of the ACC. That's going to be a big-time game right there to kick off the season. A battle of two Orange Bloods here, and this game, of course, will be in Atlanta. So Tennessee, for the third consecutive year in a row, is going to be playing an ACC team in the non-conference. They played Virginia a couple years ago in Nashville. Last year, they played in Charlotte against NC State. This year, they will play in Atlanta against Syracuse. So looking forward to this matchup here in the non-conference. Let's now go to Tennessee's home schedule in the SEC. They will play Georgia, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt in the SEC at home. So Georgia, obviously, that's a big game. You kick them off in SEC play. I'll get to that in just a moment. Georgia, obviously, you get them at home this year. That's a big, really not a big advantage for Tennessee, but it does give them that confidence to probably pull off an upset here against the Bulldogs. Arkansas, obviously, a revenge game. This is a game that you probably want to schedule here if you're a Tennessee fan, basically because you want to get revenge here on the Razorbacks. But then after that, they'll play Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. So I don't really think this is a tough home schedule whatsoever. Again, you got the revenge game against Arkansas, and then you got two teams on here that you beat last year in Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. But Georgia, obviously, that's the big game. That's really the game I think Tennessee wants to win a lot more than Arkansas and definitely than Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. Let's now go to the away schedule here for Tennessee. They will play Mississippi State, Alabama, Kentucky, and Florida all on the road this year. So Mississippi State and Kentucky are two very winnable games, in my opinion. And then you got Alabama and Florida, two teams that you beat last year by one possession of a game. I mean, Alabama, obviously, a very tough game to play every single year if you're a Tennessee fan, but they had to play on the road in this one. That's going to be a tricky game. And then you got Florida here in the Swamp. Ever since Josh Heupel got here as the head coach, Tennessee has really struggled against Florida on the road. That's been the kind of the storyline here for Tennessee with Josh Heupel. It just seems like Tennessee has not been able to get the best of Florida when it comes to playing at the Swamp. They lost to them a couple of years ago. Tennessee was actually a big favorite in that game, and they should have won that game. But either way, Florida definitely won their game because of their running game, so I think it's going to be a pretty exciting matchup depending on what happens here in this one. But that's your away schedule. Pretty tough road schedule here for Tennessee, in my opinion, when you have to play Alabama and Florida both on the road. Let's now go back to the schedule here and go game by game now for Tennessee. So again, they're going to start things off with Syracuse on August 30th. Again, a big non-conference game there in Atlanta to kick off the season on August the 30th. Then after that, it's East Tennessee State on September the 6th. And then they open up SEC play, like I mentioned earlier, against Georgia on September 13th. So instead of playing in the month of November, like I mentioned yesterday in the Georgia video, they are going to be playing Tennessee in the month of September, which honestly is kind of, surprising. I think with all this SEC changes to all these new teams coming in, I just feel like with no divisions, that's what's really changing up the SEC football scheduling. But yeah, Georgia and Tennessee here in the month of September to kick off SEC play. After that, it's UAB here on September the 20th. Then they play their first road game of the season at Mississippi State on September 27th. Going into the month of October, they get a bye week in that first weekend of the month of October. After that, it's Arkansas on October the 11th, and one of those revenge games here for Tennessee. They get a bye week before playing this game. And look, I know Tennessee fans won't be happy with this, but I like how this bye week sets up. I think it kind of gives you time to kind of recap what you did wrong against Arkansas last year on the road. They get that extra time to prepare to see what they did wrong against Arkansas, but either way, that'll be still a tough game in my opinion, even though it's at home for Tennessee. But again, I think the Vols will definitely be ready for this one. They'll definitely be out for revenge on the Razorbacks. After that, though, they head on the road to play Alabama on October 18th and the third Saturday of October. Last year's game really came down to the wire, but Tennessee's defense really was the story of last year's game, and then their offense kind of, made some plays in the second half of that last year game as well. Then after that, it's another road game against Kentucky on November 25th, so they got back-to-back road games here with Alabama and Kentucky. Those are pretty tough back-to-back road games that are not going to be easy for Tennessee because if you think about it, coming off a physical game against Alabama, let's say they lose and you got Kentucky the next weekend on the road, no bye week before playing that game, that could be a disadvantage here for the Volunteers, but maybe they're probably a big favorite still against Kentucky. After that, it's Oklahoma at home on November 1st. And then their second bye week actually comes at a really bad time. They'll play New Mexico State coming out of the bye week, which you'd rather have the bye week before playing on the road at Florida. They do play Florida here on the road on November 22nd. And then they close things out against Vanderbilt on November 29th. So this schedule for Tennessee, it's a little bit tough when you got Syracuse in the non-conference and then you got Georgia on the schedule. Obviously, you'll play Georgia every year, and then you got Alabama you play every year. But back-to-back road games against Alabama and Kentucky, that could be very tricky for Tennessee. And then you got Florida on the road, definitely in a big trap game there in the late part of November. So, again, this is a schedule that's not too bad for Tennessee, but definitely some tricky games here on this schedule. Let's now get to the projection here for the Volunteers. This is the scale I'll be using here for this projection for Tennessee. If it's a 1% game in the red, that's counted as an automatic loss here for this projection. If it's a 20% game in the orange, those are games where Tennessee will be a couple of digits or a couple of touchdowns of underdogs, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. 40% games in the yellow are games where Tennessee will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown. 6, 7, 8 points, somewhere in that range, and then your 50-50 games will be in the white, games that really can go either way. 60% games in the purple are games where Tennessee will be favored by about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points, somewhere in that range. And then your 80% games here in the blue are games where Tennessee will be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points. And then your 99% games are your automatic wins, just like the red games, your automatic losses. But your green games are counted as the easy wins. So we'll start with the easy wins here for Tennessee. I think you got 3 of them here in the green: East Tennessee State, UAB, and New Mexico State. I think all 3 of these games, Tennessee will be big favorites by 20-plus points. These games right here, Tennessee definitely should not lose them. They are definitely over that 95% mark. It would be a big shock if Tennessee were to lose one of these games, but they're counted as automatic wins, not guaranteed wins, but again, they're counted as automatic wins due to this projection. So those 3 games, I think Tennessee will be favored by 20 plus. We now go to the blue games where I think Tennessee will be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. I got 3 of them on here, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. I think all 3 of these games, Tennessee will be favored by couple of touchdowns, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that particular range. Mississippi State and Kentucky were both teams that were not really good last year. So I think Tennessee, even though on the road they will be double-digit favorites, we also count the blue games as wins. Not really guaranteed wins either, but they're also counted as slight wins here in this projection. But yeah, Mississippi State and Kentucky, both of those games on the road just because of that. That's the reason why they're both in the blue instead of the green. And then Vanderbilt, I get it. Vanderbilt's a rivalry game. Anything can go in this one, but last year's game was just not really close. Tennessee dominated against Vanderbilt, so that's the reason why it's in the blue. And I get it. Vanderbilt looks like they're a program that can probably be back on the rise, but I don't really want to go that far with Vanderbilt just yet. But again, all 3 of these games, I think Tennessee will be double-digit favorites by a couple of touchdowns, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that particular range. And the purple games for Tennessee, where they'll be favored by 6 or 7 or 8 points, I got a couple of them on here in the purple at 60%. Arkansas and Oklahoma. Because of Arkansas beating Tennessee last year, that's the reason why this game is in the purple. And Oklahoma pretty much gave Tennessee a little bit of a scare last year, but Oklahoma is a pretty average team. They're a physical team. They can really compete with Tennessee. They have that defense that can probably, create some drama for Tennessee's offense. But again, both of these games are at home, and that's the reason why they're both in the purple. I can see Arkansas being a 50-50 game, but, Arkansas, the way they finished last year, and Tennessee definitely finished ahead of Arkansas, like way ahead of Arkansas. That's the reason why it's in the purple. And then same thing for Oklahoma. Both of these teams were just pretty average last year. That's all I can really say about them. But yeah, Tennessee, I think, will be 6, 7, 8-point favorites in both of these games against Arkansas and Oklahoma. And then that leaves you with 4 50-50 games, in my opinion. Syracuse, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. You got a couple of these games on the road, one at home, and then, of course, one neutral site game. That Syracuse game is a pretty even matchup, in my opinion. Syracuse was a pretty good team last year. Will they take a step back this season? I don't really know just yet, but this is just based off of where the teams were from last year. And then, obviously, Georgia. This was a tough one to call. I probably could put this game in the yellow for Tennessee just because they lost to Georgia last year. But when I just look at this matchup, based off of how both of the teams finished, I just feel like it's going to be a 50-50 game. And the reason why it's a 50-50 game is because Tennessee is playing at home. So maybe that does give them kind of a chance here to pull off a huge upset. And then Alabama and Florida, both of these games on the road, they're pretty even matchups in my opinion. Alabama, of course, is a rivalry game. This rivalry has kind of been close now for the last few years. And then Florida, obviously, playing in the Swamp is a very tough place to play. Tennessee, again, has struggled in the Swamp for ever since Josh Heupel's got here. Tennessee, I don't think, has won at the Swamp, for like 2 decades now. If I'm not mistaken, they have just not been able to beat Florida in the Swamp. Could they do that this year? We'll wait and see, but I think these are your 50-50 games. Syracuse, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. These are definitely games that can go either way. So what's the projected record look like for Tennessee based on how tough this schedule is and based off where the teams were from last year? Well, if you count the green games as wins and you count the blue games as wins and then you average out those purple games at 60%, and then you average out these 50-50 games, let's say they split these 50-50 games, they win 2 out of the 4, that's going to give you a projected record of 10-2 here for Tennessee. So that is what the projected record looks like here for the Volunteers. Again, let's say they lose, to both Alabama and Florida, both on the road. But let's say they beat Georgia and Syracuse. That's going to give you 10 wins, and that's going to give you 2 losses for Alabama and Florida. But I think, the best case scenario for Tennessee would have to be 11-1. If they can somehow, win 3 of these 50-50 games, that's going to get them to 11-1. And then also, if they lose like one of those purple games, that's going to put them at 9-3 on that worst case scenario spot. So I think 10-2 is a pretty fair projection here for Tennessee just based on how tough this schedule is. Again, let me guys know what you think about this projection. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down in the comments below, and also give me your thoughts about Tennessee's schedule and down in the comments below as well. Is it tough or not so tough? Thanks for watching this video. video and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.